Armageddon Survival Plan, The Key. For printed version please contact JAH at JAH.Truth.net. Chapter 7. The Choosing of Abraham and His Line. God chose Abraham, because he was non-religious, and the most righteous man available, at the time. The choice had absolutely nothing to do with nationality. Abraham disowned his nation, and left them, and moved completely away from them. Genesis 12, verse 1. Before God would trust Abraham enough to give him a great responsibility, he had to be sure that he would not fail him. God therefore taught Abraham, little by little, testing him every step of the way, and on the passing of tests, gave him still more enlightenment and responsibility. After living for 100 years, and never being able to have children, God gave Abraham and his wife a son. You must think carefully and deeply about what that must have meant to Abraham, who had always wanted a son and heir, and finally and miraculously, when he was 100 years old, God gave him a miracle son. Genesis 21, verse 5. Abraham, who was 100 years old, and his wife Sarah, who was 90 years old and well past childbearing age, both laughed when the angel told them that Sarah was to bear a son. Sarah was rebuked, because she contradicted the angel. The angel said, "Is anything too hard for the Lord? Do you not believe that the Lord can bring back your time of childbearing, and give you a son?" So they called the child Isaac, which means laughter, in Hebrew. A few years later, when Abraham had had the time to get to know and love his son Isaac, God gave Abraham the penultimate test, because he had to be sure of Abraham's love, total obedience, and devotion to him. Only if Abraham passed this test, could God trust him enough to give him, personally, the responsibility of bringing enlightenment to a very dark world. This was because, if Abraham was self-motivated, and not totally obedient to God, he may have used God's enlightenment for his own personal benefit, and not for the good of everyone. Matthew 10, verse 37 and 38, Surah 9, verse 23 and 24. The test was to kill, sacrifice his own beloved miracle son, Isaac, whom he loved more than anything on earth. Just think about what Abraham must have gone through, and the agony involved in killing his son, that he had waited 100 years to have. Abraham was on the point of killing his own, and only legitimate son, when God stopped him, and told him that it was only a test, to see how much he loved God. Abraham passed the test, and the forfeit was then not taken, because the Lord knew that Abraham was really going to kill and sacrifice his son, as God was reading his thoughts. Genesis 22, verse 1 and 13. It is impossible to fool God, because he knows everything that everyone is thinking, every second of the day, in whatever human language they are thinking. Job 42, verse 2, Surah 2, verse 77. This is God's usual way. He tests everyone's faith, trust, right to the last second, and then, if they ring true, the forfeit is not taken, or the danger will pass away. If they lose their faith, the forfeit will be taken, or the danger will overcome them, whichever is applicable. Once having passed this exceptional test, Abraham had proved himself worthy of God's trust, and to carry the responsibility of trying to teach his line to be children of God, by adoption. God, as a special reward, even told Abraham, telepathically, where heaven is, but Abraham, not understanding that he was being spoken to, telepathically, thought he was imagining it and just thinking to himself. Whilst looking at the sky one night, Abraham saw the morning star and said to himself, God said to him, actually, this is my Lord. Surah 6, verse 76. Then the devil attacked him, mentally, and confused him, by showing him the moon and saying, telepathically, this is my Lord, and then, to really confuse him, the devil showed him the sun, and other things, and said, this is my Lord, until Abraham didn't know what to think, and lost his reward from God. A few generations later, from Abraham's line, a mother was tested for selfishness, and she decided it was better to give up her son than to risk his being murdered, showing unselfish and therefore real spiritual love, like Solomon's test for the two women. 1 Kings 3, verse 16 and 28. She passed the test, and was then considered worthy to teach her son how to be unselfish. God then arranged for her to have her son back, and for him to live, like Isaac, Abraham's test. That woman was the mother of Moses, and not only did Moses live, but he became a great yet humble man. He grew up strong in body and faith in God. Moses was another great, non-religious man, who talked directly to God, and strove to do God's will. He was another, adopted, child of God, with childlike faith. He put his hand in the Lord's, and the Lord led him to greatness, and protected him from evil. God worked many miracles for Moses, one of which was the burning bush, which was not really burning, energy, not fire, Exodus 3, verse 2. Another was when God let Moses' spirit show through the flesh of his hand, in front of Pharaoh, and his hand shone with a bright white light, Exodus 4, verse 6, Surah 7, verse 108. Then God parted the Red Sea, to let Moses' people escape, and to destroy the evil Egyptians, who were chasing them. Pharaoh believed, and led his people to believe, that he was greater than God. The Egyptians were arrogant, perverted, cruel, and guilty of incest and many other crimes. Using water again, to destroy the Egyptians, gave God the opportunity to kill the human animals, and to give their souls another chance, like he had done in the time of Noah, Exodus 14, verse 28. Comparing the Egypt of then, with the Egypt of today, when God said he would destroy Egypt, he was not joking. During the remainder of Moses' life, God gave his laws, cut into stone, with his finger, or a laser. That is the Ten Commandments, the book, Torah/Old Covenant or Testament, containing the laws, the statutes, the judgments, the economic policy, the agricultural policy, diet, etc., for the world to live by, forever. Matthew 5, verse 18. God's laws are the only laws of this planet, and, like God, are the same from the beginning of time, until now, and forever. Malachi 3, verse 6 and Malachi 4, verse 4. He also gave Moses, the Ark of the Covenant, and told the people to come and talk to the Ark, when they wanted to communicate with God. At that time, people still had a very simple mentality, and so, instead of telling them to use telepathy, which would have been too much to comprehend, God gave them a dummy transmitter. It was a material and inanimate object, not a priest, so that the people would talk directly to God, and not have the blind priests leading the blind congregation. The Lord gave them this non-religious, material object, just to give them confidence, being something they could see and touch. It was also a place where they could store the tablets of stone, on which the Ten Commandments were written, and the 5 scroll books of the law, statutes, judgments, economic policy, agricultural policy and diet, etc. The building of the Ark of the Covenant would also be a test of the people's values, initially and permanently. God asked the people to give up their gold, silver, brass, precious stones and other valuables, to make the Ark, and related treasures. This was to see if they loved worldly treasures, mammon, the devil's values, more than they loved God. If they gave up these things, voluntarily, it would prove that they chose God, and heavenly values, in preference to worldly values. The future, and permanent test, would be to leave the Ark, etc., as a test, to see if they could resist the devil's tempting, to take back the precious metals and stones, etc., from which, it, and the other related treasures were built. There are many references, in the books of Moses, to God's spaceship, covered by a smoke-screen cloud, which looked like a cloud of smoke, by day, and a fire, by night. In daylight, the smoke cloud hid the spacecraft completely, but, by night, the lights on board, and the engines Exodus 40, verse 38, gave off a great glare, which mixed with the smoke screen, and gave the impression to people of a very simple mentality, of a fire in the sky, with great heat and thunder, and lightning, and strange noises, Exodus 19, verse 16 and Exodus 20, verse 18 and Exodus 24, verse 15 to 17 and Numbers 9, verse 15 and 16. The people were told not to go near, and were afraid to do so, because of the heat. Some people never do as they are told and did, in the beginning, and were burned. Exodus 19, verse 17 and 21 and Exodus 20, verse 18. God also came down in a pillar of smoke, to talk to Moses. Exodus 33, verse 9 and Exodus 34, verse 5, so that the people could not see him. On one occasion, Moses' soul showed through his face, after he had been talking to God. Exodus 34, verse 29 to 35, and the people were afraid, so he covered his face with a veil. The smoke cloud, with the spaceship inside it, guided the people, and they followed it. Numbers 9, verse 17 to 23 and Numbers 10, verse 34 to 36, wherever it went. When it stopped, they stopped and camped, sometimes for days, and when it moved, they followed it. The devil had to try to pull the people back, away from God, so he worked on their egos, making them arrogant and stubborn, because they thought that they were special in God's eyes. The Lord became angry with them, on many occasions. Once, when the people were complaining, the Lord burned some of them to death, and would have burned more of them, but Moses begged for them to be forgiven. Numbers 11, verse 1 and 2. Over many generations, they became worse and worse, and Satan converted their belief into an organized religion. They made up their own laws, customs and traditions, the Talmud, to allow themselves to break God's commandments. Mark 7, verse 6 to 13. The problems arose, because the people stopped communicating directly with God, and started to listen to priests, and became the blind, being led by the blind. Matthew 15, verse 14, Hosea 4, verse 9. They eventually became so arrogant and blind, that, when Jesus came, the Jews refused to accept his soul, spirit being, as that of God's oldest Son, and they still do refuse to accept him, and his teachings. They also refuse to accept that Mohammed brought more messages, from God, into the world. The devil has them so tied up, in their religious arrogance, that he has been able to con them, perfectly, twice, into not listening to Jesus and Muhammad's messages from God, and they think that they are really smart. It was their priests, and religion, that nailed the human animal body, that God's Son was using, onto the cross. Their arrogance, in thinking that they are still God's chosen people, and that they are the only ones who will survive the last day, when they claimed responsibility for the murder of Jesus, and refused to accept his teachings, clinging to their evil religion, which is what killed Jesus, is absolutely ludicrous. The cursing of the fig tree, which is the scriptural symbol for the Jews, Matthew 21, verse 19 and 20, means that Jesus cursed the Jews, and they have remained cursed and punished, and hated and persecuted, ever since. This was done, in order to teach them that Talmudic Judaism is evil, and thereby encourage them to leave Talmudic Judaism, turn to the Torah, and partake of the new covenant. The Jews, 2,000 years ago, said, "Let his blood be on us and on our children," Matthew 27, verse 25, meaning, let us be punished for murdering him, instead of Pontius Pilate. Jesus, and all of the prophets, have taught humility, childlike faith and the destruction of selfishness, so that the devil has less chance to use your ego, to fool you. Whilst ever you have an ego, the devil can use it. It is their arrogance, in believing that they alone are chosen, above all other people, that has created anti-Semitism and supposedly caused Hitler, who was a Satanist and the Antichrist, 666 Revelation 13, verse 18. Hitler claimed he would have a 1,000-year Reich/rule, as the reign of Christ on earth yet to come, incendiary bombs, etc. Revelation 13, verse 13, Deutschmark in the hand and marks in the forehead. Revelation 13, verse 16, resurrecting, that is giving life to the first beast, which had the wound by the sword and lived. Revelation 13, verse 14, that is the Roman Empire. Hitler styled himself on the Roman Empire and used its emblems, that is the eagle and the swastika, who himself was an Ashkenazi, Genesis 10, verse 3. Japhetite, not Semite, counterfeit Jew, Revelation 2, verse 9, who was financed and installed as Chancellor of Germany by Zionist, Ashkenazi, Japhetite, not Semite, counterfeit Jewish banksters. Revelation 3, verse 9, to allegedly try to wipe them out, and the PLO to hate them. Hitler was the midwife who facilitated the birth of the Zionist, Ashkenazi, counterfeit Jewish state in Israel. The major factor in the war, between the Israelis and the PLO, is religions. If they both get rid of their stupid, evil, organized religions, there is no real difference between them. They are not only both Gentiles, but also Venusians. Although the Arabs are Semites and the Ashkenazi counterfeit Jews are not Semites, but are Japhethites, Genesis 10, verse 3, who therefore are not God's chosen and have no biblical God-given right to the Holy Land. If they cannot live together, peacefully, and share what they have, with each other, here on earth, then God is certainly not going to let them come home, and will destroy both nations, on the last day, starting with all of the priests.